The Forgotten Bunker. The sun had barely begun its descent behind the rolling hills of the old mining region when Lukas and his friends arrived at the bunker. Rusted metal doors gaped open like the jaws of some forgotten creature, half buried in the overgrowth that had claimed it over decades. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decay, the remnants of both history and neglect. Legends told among local children whispered of a place where time seemed to halt, where the shadows inside held secrets best left undisturbed. Lukas felt a thrill of excitement mingled with unease, the way one feels standing on the edge of a cliff, tempted to leap, yet aware that the fall could be fatal. Inside, the bunker was a labyrinth of narrow corridors, walls etched with the marks of those long gone. Each step echoed off concrete, the sound magnified, distorted, as though the building itself was listening. Cobwebs clung to corners, thick and glistening with dust, catching what little light slipped past the cracks in the heavy doors. The air was cool, unnervingly still, and every breath Lukas took seemed to carry 1,000 tiny particles of forgotten history. His friends laughed nervously, their voices brittle in the hollow space, masking the creeping tension that made hair stand on end and hearts pound faster than necessary. The deeper they ventured, the more the bunker seemed alive. Faint sounds, almost imperceptible at first, began to thread through the silence, the clink of metal, soft shuffles of footsteps, whispers that faded when Lukas turned his head. He paused, straining his ears. Was it the wind? Or someone, something, following them? Shadows stretched and recoiled along the walls, cast by the weak beam of a flashlight. Every corner held a promise of discovery, yet also a threat. Every door could hide a secret or a danger. The feeling of being watched gnawed at Lukas, a sensation he tried to dismiss as imagination, yet could not fully shake. As they approached a central chamber, the air grew heavier, almost palpable. Dust motes floated like tiny specters in the beam of their flashlights. On the walls, faded markings hinted at the bunker's past. Numbers, symbols, dates, cryptic messages that might have been left by soldiers, miners, or prisoners. Lukas bent down to examine a crude carving of a figure, its features distorted, grotesque. His fingers brushed the concrete, and for an instant a chill shot up his arm, as if the bunker had acknowledged his presence. A soft groan echoed from the far end, and the flashlight trembled in his grip. The others froze, their laughter gone, replaced by a tense silence that swallowed every sound. The shadows seemed to shift, rearranging themselves when they weren't looking directly, creating fleeting glimpses of shapes, a figure standing in a doorway, just at the edge of vision, gone when turned toward. Lukas swallowed hard. The thrill of exploration was now tinged with dread. Each step forward felt like intrusion, trespassing into a space that resisted memory and demanded respect, or punishment. Yet curiosity propelled them further, deeper into the darkness where echoes of the past whispered and waited. A sudden metallic clatter reverberated through the corridor, startling them all. Lukas' flashlight flickered, briefly plunging them into darkness, and when the light returned, he thought he saw movement at the far wall, a shadow stretching, twisting as if alive. The friends exchanged uneasy glances, and a shared, unspoken fear took root. This bunker was not empty, and they were not alone. A low, murmuring sound began, soft and incomprehensible, rising slowly, surrounding them. The walls themselves seemed to vibrate with the sound, carrying with it a message in a language older than any of them could comprehend. Lukas realized, with a sinking feeling, that their adventure had become a trap. The deeper Lukas and his friends ventured, the bunker seemed to expand unnaturally, corridors elongating beyond the memory of the entrance. The air thickened with damp and an indescribable metallic scent, clinging to their skin and clothing. Every step echoed unnervingly, bouncing from walls in irregular rhythms that disoriented them. Shadows pooled and stretched at angles that defied the flashlight beams, and fleeting glimpses of figures vanished whenever Lukas tried to focus on them. It was no longer just exploration. It was survival against an unseen force that seemed to mold the environment around their fear. In a larger chamber, they discovered remnants of old equipment: rusted lockers, broken chairs, and cracked gas masks. Strange etchings covered the walls, lines, numbers, and symbols that pulsed faintly in the dim light, as if reacting to their presence. Lukas approached one, tracing the marks with a trembling finger. The concrete was cold, unnervingly smooth beneath the rough surface, almost like polished stone. A soft, almost imperceptible whisper rose behind him. "Do not stay!" He spun around, heart hammering, but his friends were staring at the far end of the chamber, frozen in shock. A shadow moved there, too large, too fluid to belong to any human. It stretched and coiled along the walls, forming shapes that seemed sentient, observing, waiting. Lukas' flashlight flickered, and in the brief darkness, he thought he felt a cold hand brush his shoulder. He whirled, but nothing was there. His friends were whispering urgently, voices tight with fear, suggesting they leave, but the way back seemed to have shifted. Doors that led to corridors before now opened to narrow passageways lined with strange, damp walls. The bunker was no longer a place of linear space. It had become a living labyrinth, reacting to their presence, feeding on their panic. Lukas took a cautious step forward. The floor beneath him seemed to pulse with subtle vibrations, a heartbeat too slow and heavy to be natural. The whispers rose in intensity, overlapping, growing in a rhythm that matched his own escalating pulse. Shapes appeared in the peripheral vision of each friend, shadowed figures in uniform, some with hollow eyes, some with grotesque features, as if carved from nightmares. One of them reached toward Lukas, hand outstretched, only to vanish when he tried to look directly. The fear was palpable, each of them beginning to understand that the bunker was not abandoned. It was inhabited, or perhaps haunted, by echoes of a past that refused to rest. From a far corner, a muffled scream pierced the air. Lukas froze, straining to identify its source. It was human, and yet not, distorted as if passing through layers of time. A wave of cold air swept through the chamber, extinguishing one of the flashlights and leaving them partially in darkness. The remaining lights trembled in their hands as though alive, flickering across walls covered in crude, desperate carvings, names, dates, faces. Lukas noticed one particular figure etched in relief on the concrete, a soldier, eyes wide with terror, mouth open in silent scream. The resemblance to a soldier he had read about in local wartime records was uncanny, sending a shiver down his spine. Panic took hold. One friend, trembling, suggested splitting up to find an exit. Lukas refused, gripping his flashlight like a lifeline. But the bunker's corridors had shifted again, doors that should have led outward now opening onto dead ends, walls closing in as if breathing around them. The whispers grew louder, now distinct voices speaking individual names, recounting events they could not have known. Lukas recognized one of the names as his grandfather, a miner lost decades ago in a collapse. The horror of realization hit him. The bunker was not just haunted. It remembered, it knew, and it was gathering them into its fold. A distant metallic clang reverberated through the maze of concrete, followed by soft, deliberate footsteps that circled them in the darkness. Lukas' friends clung to him, fear etching their faces into pale masks. The whispers became chants, syllables blending into a language both alien and intimate, promising revelation and terror in equal measure. The bunker's walls seemed to pulse in response, each vibration resonating through their bones. Lukas realized with mounting dread that they were no longer intruders. They were participants, drawn into a story that had begun long before their arrival, a story that might never allow them to leave. The air inside the bunker grew colder with every step, a chilling presence that seemed to seep into their very bones. Lukas and his friends moved cautiously, flashlights sweeping across damp walls that appeared to shift subtly enough to make them doubt their own senses. Every shadow seemed to harbor intent, and every distant echo, a clatter, a shuffle, a whispered syllable, made the skin crawl. They stumbled upon a stairwell leading further down, descending into a subterranean depth that had remained hidden from all maps and memory. The darkness below was absolute, a void that swallowed light and sound, yet they felt eyes upon them, following, judging, and anticipating their next move. Each step echoed like a funeral drum, rhythmic, inescapable. The walls of the stairwell were lined with inscriptions, faded but legible, dates, names, cryptic phrases, some crossed out as if the writer had feared discovery. Lukas traced a hand along the cold concrete, shivering as the carvings seemed to react under his touch. Whispers surfaced, forming sentences that clawed at his understanding. "You were warned. You belong. You cannot leave." His friends began to panic, their breathing ragged, eyes darting to corners where shadows thickened unnaturally. One of them swore he saw a figure at the bottom of the stairs, watching silently, before it melted into the darkness. They reached a chamber, larger than any above, its ceiling arched and damp, and here the bunker's presence was most tangible. Old equipment, rusted and broken, lay scattered among piles of debris. On one wall, a series of portraits, or impressions resembling faces, emerged from the concrete itself. Eyes wide with silent terror, mouths agape, each face unique yet universally haunting. Lukas felt drawn toward them, unable to resist, as if compelled to witness the suffering of those trapped within these walls decades ago. He noted, with a creeping horror, that some faces bore features familiar to him. Distant relatives, forgotten neighbors, miners from old local tragedies. The whispers turned insistent, almost accusing. "See us. Remember. Stay." A sudden crash made them jump. A section of the wall collapsed slightly, revealing a narrow passageway beyond. The temperature dropped further, frost forming in streaks along the concrete, and the shadows seemed to coalesce into figures moving with deliberate slowness. Lukas hesitated at the threshold, feeling a tug, as though the bunker itself had extended its grip into his mind, probing, testing. The others urged him forward, but each step was met with resistance, a subtle distortion in gravity or perception, as if the laws of reality bent to the bunker's will. Panic threatened to overtake reason, but curiosity, that dangerous thrill, pushed them deeper into the unknown. Voices multiplied now, distinct and overlapping. Soldiers who had once occupied the bunker, miners lost to accidents, whispers of children who had disappeared, all seemed to converge in the air, telling fragments of stories Lukas could barely comprehend. Yet within the chaos, one phrase emerged clearly, repeated, "The exit is not what you seek. The path changes. The path chooses." His friends began to tremble, realizing that leaving might be impossible, that the bunker was no longer a static space, but a living, reactive entity. Shadows moved across walls like ink in water, forming shapes that suggested hands, faces, and figures beckoning them further in, deeper into the belly of a place that had waited for intruders like them for decades. Suddenly, Lukas noticed something disturbing. Their own reflections appeared briefly in the polished surfaces of metal debris, only they were wrong. Their eyes were hollow, their expressions twisted with fear, yet not entirely their own. It was as if the bunker had begun imprinting its history upon them, marking them as part of its story, eroding the boundary between visitor and resident. Lukas felt the chill wrap tighter, a suffocating pressure pressing on his chest, whispering that they were no longer mere explorers. The walls themselves seemed to hum with the accumulated memories of lives lost, of secrets buried and unrest unresolved. One of his friends screamed, pointing toward a shadow that had split from the wall and now advanced with purpose. The sound of it sliding along the floor, unaccompanied by feet, made Lukas' heart hammer in his throat. He realized then that the bunker did not simply contain echoes of the past. It had agency, a consciousness of some sort, aware of their intrusion, ready to assimilate them into its labyrinthine memory. Lukas gripped his flashlight tightly, every nerve on fire, knowing that every choice from this point on could seal their fate. The whispers crescendoed, a chorus of hundreds of voices forming a single chilling command, "Come, or stay, forever." The deeper they descended, the bunker's corridors seemed to pulse with a life of their own, walls breathing slowly, exhaling cold, damp air that carried the voices of the lost. Lukas felt his grip on reality weakening. Every step was a negotiation with the building itself, which seemed to resist their passage, shifting just enough to confuse and disorient. Their flashlights flickered as if in protest, casting fractured beams across jagged surfaces and twisted shadows. Shapes that had once been distant now moved closer, silent but undeniably alive. The echoes of old footsteps merged with their own, creating a haunting symphony of the past and present. In a vast central hall, they stumbled upon remnants of old beds, personal belongings, and scattered documents, yellowed and brittle. The whispers grew clearer, no longer just fragments but conversations, arguments, and pleas. Soldiers arguing with unseen commanders, miners begging for release, children crying for their parents. Lukas bent to pick up a tattered photograph, the face of a young boy staring back with eyes that seemed to burn with awareness. The moment he touched it, a shiver ran through his entire body, and the shadows shifted violently, forming the indistinct outline of a man reaching out from the wall. Panic spread among the group. One friend attempted to flee, running down a corridor that now stretched impossibly long. The walls seemed to close behind him, muffling his screams until they were swallowed by the darkness. Lukas shouted for him to stop, but the sound of his own voice seemed to bounce back distorted, almost as if the bunker were mocking him. Cold fingers of air brushed against their necks and arms, leaving goosebumps and a sense of being watched from every angle. The whispers transformed into urgent commands, "Do not leave, stay, join us." It was clear that the bunker did not merely trap them physically, it was ensnaring their minds, bending perception to its will. A low, metallic groan echoed through the hall, and a section of the ceiling collapsed, revealing a hidden chamber beyond. The walls inside were lined with small alcoves, each containing skeletal remains and relics of those who had disappeared before. Names etched into the concrete above the alcoves told of soldiers, miners, and civilians, decades-old victims whose fates had been forgotten by the outside world. Lukas felt an oppressive weight of sorrow and fear as he realized the bunker had been collecting memories, life remnants, and perhaps even souls, preserving them in a state between existence and oblivion. Every whisper, every shadow, was a testament to the place's growing power, its hunger for life to sustain its memory. The friends huddled together, too frightened to move, yet unable to retreat. One of them whimpered, pointing at a corner where a dark mass shifted with intention, crawling along the walls like liquid shadow. Lukas's heart raced as the mass formed shapes resembling each of them, twisted versions, hollow-eyed, mouths frozen in silent screams. He recognized the truth. The bunker was replicating them, creating copies that would eventually replace the living if they lingered too long. His mind fought to cling to reality as the shadows coalesced, circling, whispering their names, recounting their every action since entering. Desperation mounted. Lukas tried to recall the way they had entered, but the corridors had morphed beyond recognition. Every familiar landmark was gone, replaced by new twists and dead ends. The walls seemed to breathe heavier, exhaling a chorus of ghostly voices that echoed the friends' deepest fears. Lukas realized that escape would require more than courage. It would demand cunning, understanding the bunker's rhythm, predicting its movements. Yet even as he formulated a plan, a shadow lunged from the darkness, swallowing one of his friends, leaving nothing but a scream that faded into silence. The bunker had claimed its first, and possibly not last, victim that night. Lukas could barely breathe, his chest tight with terror, as the remaining friends clung to him. The bunker's walls seemed to pulse in time with his heartbeat, vibrating with whispers that no longer felt distant but intimate, invasive, wrapping around his mind like chains. Every step forward seemed preordained, yet each direction led to new horrors, hallways that bent impossibly, floors that shivered beneath their weight, and shadowed forms that emerged from walls only to dissolve when faced directly. He realized with a sinking horror that the bunker had grown sentient, learning, adapting, feeding on fear and curiosity alike. It was alive in a way that defied logic, a place that remembered, hunted, and consumed. As they stumbled into a larger chamber, the remains of those trapped decades ago became impossible to ignore. Piles of bones and relics littered the floor, interspersed with personal items. A child's toy, a rusted helmet, a weathered notebook. Faces seemed to emerge from the walls, distorted in terror, their hollow eyes following Lukas and his friends. The whispers turned into distinct voices, reciting names, dates, moments of their lives in haunting detail, as though the bunker were cataloging them, marking them for assimilation. Lukas realized the horrifying truth. The bunker did not just trap bodies, it trapped essence, capturing fragments of souls to feed its unending memory. A shadow detached itself from the wall, rising slowly, coalescing into a human-like figure with eyes as empty as the abyss. Lukas felt a paralyzing dread as it glided toward them, yet when he looked away for a fraction of a second, it vanished, only to reappear in another corner. The friends tried to flee, but the corridors shifted again, closing off familiar paths, forcing them back toward the chamber. Panic had transformed into raw terror, each heartbeat a drum of inevitability. Lukas shouted, urging his friends to stay close, to resist splitting apart. But fear made them stumble, their movements clumsy, easily anticipated by the bunker's subtle, manipulative presence. Time seemed irrelevant. Minutes stretched into hours as the bunker toyed with them. Voices recited their thoughts, secrets, fears, whispered threats and promises of eternal imprisonment. Lukas could feel his own memories being probed, rearranged, tested, as if the building was weaving them into its tapestry. Shadows crept closer, molding themselves into twisted reflections of each friend, hollow-eyed doppelgangers mimicking movements with an eerie precision. The realization hit him that the bunker's hunger was not for life alone, but for identity, the very essence that made someone who they were. Escape was no longer about finding a physical exit. It was a battle to retain selfhood, to resist becoming another whisper, another shadow in the vast memory of the place. A final, horrifying truth manifested as the friends' own faces appeared in alcoves along the walls, carved in delicate detail, eyes wide with terror, mouths open in silent screams. Lukas felt a chill run through him as he understood. The bunker did not kill in a conventional sense. It preserved, absorbed, and replaced. The shadows moved closer, the whispers now unified, a chorus chanting in an indecipherable yet intelligible warning, "Stay, or join, forever." Heart racing, Lukas made a desperate leap into a narrow corridor that seemed to bend impossibly toward a faint light at its end. The air tugged at him, resisting, pulling him back, but his determination to survive overrode the oppressive force. Emerging into the daylight, Lukas gasped, feeling the warmth of sun on his skin, and saw the landscape familiar yet alien. Behind him, the bunker loomed, indistinguishable from the hill it was built into, silent and inert, yet brimming with latent malice. His friends were beside him, trembling, their eyes wide with disbelief. They had survived, but each felt an unshakable presence lingering in their minds. They would never speak of what had occurred, for words could not capture the horrors, nor could they admit the lingering feeling of being watched, followed, remembered. Lukas knew, deep within, that the bunker's reach extended beyond walls, beyond time, and that part of them, an echo, a shadow, remained inside, forever bound to the memory of the forgotten. The bunker waits, patient, hungry, remembering all who dare enter its domain. And somewhere, in the darkness, it calls again.